Coming up on this episode of Common Denominator.
Everything in this world is work, but it doesn't all have to be horrible. We can become kinder. We can become more sensitive. We can use our time better. Tragedy forces us sometimes to do that.
This is Common Denominator, straight up conversations with Moshe Popak, a podcast that showcases optimism, positivity, and human connection. We chat with unique personalities with diverse backgrounds and points of view whose experiences will inspire you to seek common ground with others in your own lives. Let's find out what brings us together. Today, how to overcome unimaginable grief. Devorie Kreiman and her husband lost 4 of their 8 children as infants due to a rare mitochondrial disorder and lost their only son in a drowning accident. And though she endured some incredibly dark times, ultimately, through faith, humor, and joy, Devorie found the courage and grace to persevere. We're honored to have her on the show. Now, here's Moshe.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to the show. Devorie, thank you so much for joining us on Common Denominator.
It's a pleasure to be here.
So, over a 10-year period, you have lost 4 of your children as infants to a rare disease. Can you tell us about the disease and the process of what had happened?
Yeah, sure. So my husband's a rabbi. So you know how the rabbis and the large families, and we had 3 children in 3 years, healthy children. And when we had our 4th baby, he looked perfectly normal. And for some reason, he just was weak. And the doctors really weren't sure what it was. And as time went on, they diagnosed him with failure to thrive, which basically means it's a baby not doing what a baby's supposed to do. It got worse and worse, and eventually he died. And the doctor said it happens, it's a fluke. We had another baby. We're Orthodox, so this is what we do. And then she started to show symptoms also pretty soon after birth. And that's when we realized that we're dealing with something that's not just a one-time thing, but hereditary. And eventually, we had a healthy child in between, and eventually it took a while. In the end, we had 4 children that were sick with it. It turns out that it's a autosomal recessive, which means it's a 1 in 4 chance in every pregnancy that our child will be sick. And what's interesting with the babies is that they present perfectly normal at birth, but they're just missing the enzyme. It's a cytochrome C oxidase deficiency. They're missing the enzyme that produces energy. I used to think about that a lot because people talk about how I don't have energy. We have energy. We produce energy all the time, but my babies were unable to produce energy. And eventually, as they got bigger and they needed more energy, their systems would fail. And we spent a lot of time with the Mitochondrial Foundation trying to figure out how to help them. We got pretty far in the research, but we couldn't cure it. So I had the 4 children.
In other words, there is no cure today for that disease. It's in other
No.
Right.
No. I mean, the mitochondrial disorders is a range of them. And there are many people who have similar disorders, but it depends if the enzyme is completely missing or if there's less of it. So in our case, no, there is no cure that we know of at this point. No.
And I know this is a tough question, but what was the conversation like between you and your husband when you kind of knew that this was a possibility and you wanted to continue to have children? What was that decision-making process like?
So the way it worked was with the first baby, we had no idea. And we had always assumed that we would have a lot of children. So it wasn't like we took a risk 4 times. So that baby and the baby after that baby was a boy and then a little girl. By both of those, we really had no idea that we were dealing with something that could repeat. Then we went to the Lubavitcher Rebbe, and the Rebbe would give out dollars on Sundays. And people flew in from all over the world. And what Sunday dollars was is that people would line up. The Lubavitcher Rebbe, it's Rebbe Nachum Mendel Schneerson, would give each person $1, and then he would give blessings. So when my husband went and he tried to get a blessing for the baby, the Rebbe would not give him a blessing for the baby, but the Rebbe gave him a blessing for me, and then the Rebbe gave him a blessing for a healthy child in the set time and in the right time. So we had that child. After we had the 2 sick children, we named her Bracha, which is blessing. She's 27 years old. She's in 3rd year med student now, healthy, thriving. Every child is a miracle. We just didn't realize the extent until she was born. And then after she was born, so the risk that we took was really the two babies after that. And we did it with a lot of discussion with rabbis and with doctors. It was a 25% chance with each pregnancy, but they turned out to be sick. That was the last two. And this is something that really in the religious circles, it's unusual, but we knew when I was in my early 30s that there were not going to be any more children. And in a lot of ways, that loss was profoundly deep because it wasn't something I could talk about. So while everybody was thinking about how sad it was that the 4 babies died, and it was, and I had the 4 healthy children and 3 born before any of this, and then my miracle in the middle. So we had the 4 healthy, and then we had the 4 who were sick. But I was also dealing with a very private and really bottomless pain because it had no shape to it. No date of birth, date of death. It was only all the babies we couldn't have. And in the Orthodox world, this is an anomaly, at least in the world that I grew up in, the Orthodox world as it was 30 years ago. And I had to learn how to come into my own knowing in my early 30s that there weren't going to be any more children.
Right. I know in that world, again, I did grow up in that world, and to have, I myself, and I wouldn't say I myself have 10 children, and it's not from a necessarily a religious perspective. My wife's an only child, right? And it was just, I love children. My wife loves children, and we're lucky to have that. But I know in the general background of Lubavitch in that Orthodox sect, it is very commonplace for women to have as many children as they're blessed with. So I understand that point as in being in the early 30s, not being able to have more children. But and then I know also something happened to your oldest child as well.
Yes.
Tell us about that story.
So my oldest child was my Yossi. I have 1 boy and 3 girls. I still have 1 boy and 3 girls. Yossi is always going to be my child. Yossi was a very interesting boy. He loved nature. He was nerdy in that way. Like he would go with just this group of older men and go up the mountains to look at stars. And he was fascinated by just fish and just really all animals. And he was a very studious kid. He was just, everything interested him. He was always with a book, and he loved his mama. He was really not a guy's guy. And he was the kind of kid, like even when school was closed, I mean, this kid was reading history. He spoke a lot of languages. He traveled a lot. He was hired to be a learning director in Chabad camp in Costa Rica. Chabad has outreach centers all over the world. So Chabad kids tend to go everywhere. So Yossi was 22 when this started, but 23 when he got really into it. He went to Costa Rica, and it was a summer program. And the kids went out on a trip. They went scuba diving, and Yossi just fell in love with what he saw under the water. He got to go just as an add-on because he was staff. And he came back we live in California. He came back to LA, and he told us he just really loves it. And it was interesting about Yossi is that he wasn't an adventurous kid. So it wasn't about the sport. It was about the nature. In this process, while all this was going on, he got engaged, and he went scuba diving. And I was a principal of a school at that time, junior high school. And we used to do the prayers together every morning. And before we did the prayers, I would do a little saying of the day. It's a little book called Hayom Yom, which means the days. It's the words of the day, basically. And that day in the Hebrew calendar, it's the 20th day of the month of Cheshvat. So every year, the calendar, you get the same saying on the same Hebrew date. And that day, I taught the whole school, because we would do this in front of the whole school before we prayed. I taught about divine providence, and I was teaching how nothing in this world is an accident. Nothing is random. The movement of a blade of grass has a purpose that's set from the time the world was created, and how much more so the movement of a person. And I think that if someone had stopped me afterwards and said, what you just taught now, do you believe that there's a godly plan to everything, that there's no random? And I'd have said, sure, I believe it. But about 2 hours after I had taught that, I was on my way home, and my Yossi had gone. He wanted to get his scuba diving certification. Mm-hmm. So he had gone, he had borrowed the equipment, and he was careless with the safety hose, and his instructor said to him, it's okay, it'll probably be fine. He also had too much weight, and he drowned. Mm. And I remember when I got the call, So my husband came to get me. They called my husband, actually. My husband came home to get me. And at that point, Yossi was already gone, but I didn't believe it. So I said, let's go to the hospital. And the whole way to the hospital, I had taken a book of Psalms with me. It's what we do. We pray. But I wasn't able to open it because I kept saying the same thing again and again and again. The whole way to the hospital, I kept saying, this is not the babies. This is Yossi. Because in my head, I was the woman who had lost 4 children. I was the woman who, although people didn't know it, but I had to accept not being able to have more children. So I divided my life into the 2. I had the 4 sick children who died, and I have the 4 healthy children. I had survived my big thing already. So the 4 healthy children are healthy. And I just kept repeating that the whole way to the hospital. It's not the babies. This is Yossi. And Yossi died. And the hard part for me, besides the whole grief of losing him, which I still feel his presence every day, it's softened over the years because his humor and his wisdom and all that is more with me now than the horror of his death. That has changed. But there was really that shock and that anger. I could not believe that something else had happened to me, to us.
Yeah. Did you, I mean, I'm just processing this. It's a lot. What was the process for you to begin to live and cope? Was it support groups? Was it people that have gone through similar things that you've spoke to? Like what, if listeners are listening and they're going through their own tragedies and things that their own journeys, what was things that practically helped you move on with life? Because that is the way, this is a very tough story. And in the end, a lot of people have a lot of tough stories, and you have to continue to move forward. So what were some of the things that you did in order to move forward?
So there's different levels. There was some practical things. I did EMDR and EFT. EMDR works with lights, and it's a very powerful therapy. It helped me a lot. I went to Israel to talk to other survivors, particularly those who had lost only children or multiple losses, because I felt that if they could survive, we always do that. Like when the babies died, people who lost, quote, only one baby would gain comfort from speaking to someone who lost more and seeing just that person could survive. So I did reach out. I got in touch with Sherry Mandel and her foundation. She lost a child who was actually born the same time as Yossi. He died 10 years earlier, but they were born the same summer. She has a foundation. I met with people who, especially in Israel, I always say in Israel, they know how to do broken. But the biggest thing really was that, I grew up Orthodox, and we've always talked about soul. And we have a very clear understanding that this world is a soul journey. We bring holiness and soul and awareness of soul into everything that we do in this world. Meaning when we are needed for something, we help somebody by sending them food if they're not well. That's physical. We're giving them food, but it's soul work. It's the giving. It's higher. And the babies really, in a way, prepared me for that, because I was very aware with my babies of this whole concept of soul. I remember once when I was holding one of my babies and I was looking at her and I was thinking, and I'd been very angry and very anxious. I had all the negative feelings, very jealous of other women who had healthy children. But I remember a transcendent moment. I'm holding one of my babies and I'm looking at her and I realized that I'm showing up her every day. I'm her mom and she has no idea I'm there. She's already in a coma, but I have to come because I want the hospital staff to know that she's an important baby. And also because I figured at that moment, she's getting comfort. Every human being gets comfort by being held, by being touched. I would sing to her, I would hold her. How much she was aware, I don't know, but it was important. And I had this idea, like this sense of what I'm doing is really unconditional love. I'm going to get nothing back. And it was actually a very powerful moment. I felt so, like lifted by an awareness of something bigger than, we cuddle a baby and the baby giggles and it feels good. I didn't get any of that. I had to give only at a soul level because my babies really were soul. They were like really wisps of life. They were soul. They came into this world. The longest one lived only a few months. The long process was mostly us working with the doctors and the research of trying to help them and trying to find ways to prevent it or, diagnose in pregnancy, which we couldn't. So I became aware of soul because that's what my babies were about. So when Yossi died, I had all this learning that I had done about the reason that we come in this world and the work we have to do, which is to connect to our own soul powers. And I had to lean into it. I didn't right away. I was angry. I kind of shut down for a while. Right. And, I had to go through that. And then I slowly, part of it also very practically, I have a wonderful husband. I had 2 daughters who were married and a teenager. My miracle baby was a teenager at that point, and we can't throw everything away.
Right.
So that was a lot of that also. But really, really the learning that I had done about why we live and what we're here for. If it's real, then it's real. It was like the divine providence. It's not halfway. Truth is truth. It doesn't mean it's easy or comfortable, but it's true. So even if it hurts.
I remember I was reading about this motivational speaker, Eckhart Tolle, and he was saying he would just fell into this, he would be on this bench and he fell into this like kind of deep depression and darkness. And I see that story, you talk about the brokenness, and all of a sudden, from once you get past the anger and past all of that, he talks about this kind of out of body experience where something just kind of washes over him, and he realizes that he's here on this world, he's here on this earth to do something different, and he's in this state. You go from the deepest, darkest space and a state of like euphoria, and he was in that space for weeks with nothing. He wanted nothing. And when you hear stories like that, it makes you really question. I mean, even if I'm not talking about the level of belief in God, or just to recognize that there probably is something greater than ourselves. We see it, right? Like who created the sun, the moon, the stars, the earth, and in times like the things that you went through personally, when you don't have something that's greater than yourself, when it's great, fine. It's great. It's ego. It's me. But when times are tough and you don't have a place to put that weight to, that's the challenge. So I always found that to create that relationship through meditation, through prayer, and different ways like that. I know one of your tools, which we mentioned before the show, is about laughter. How long did that, I guess, tool? I always think about tools in a toolbox. Did that tool come to you about using humor and laughter?
At his funeral. Because my daughter came from London and she had just made it. We kept waiting and waiting. And then she just ran in, and the whole community was waiting quietly, just standing at the cemetery. She missed the first part of it because by the time her flight landed, we bury in Orthodox law as soon as we can, but we were waiting for her. But I was watching and hoping that the sun wouldn't go down. And she ran in and she said to me, Yossi is loving all this attention, which we knew was true. And actually, the thing about it is that the tools kicked in right away, but I came in and out of it. I would go from angry to very spiritual to angry again to scared, like in and out a lot. But the part that forced me forward, Yossi was a very funny child, and he had just a very quirky way, and I wanted to be connected to him. And the grief really, it had to be, and it really was threaded with a lot of who Yossi was. So Yossi he had started dating, and this I have to tell you because it was just so him. We date by shidduch, which means it's set up through a matchmaker, but the kids go out and meet the girl that they're gonna, hopefully they meet to see if it works. But it is it's set up before. It's arranged, but he gets, of course, to date. But we did find him this shidduch before, this match before. So this was over the Jewish holidays, and he was going to New York to meet the girl that he ended up getting engaged to. So he was going to go right when the holiday was over. And it was the holiday of Simchat Torah, which is when we dance around with the Torah. We finished the yearly reading of the weekly Torah portion. And there's a lot of dancing and some drinking. And Yossi was generally a shy kid. But at that point, he was very, very excited because he was going to fly to New York, and he was getting into the dating, and he was anxious. So we walked to the synagogue that night, and I was watching Yossi dance, and it was mostly older men in the synagogue that night. And for every step they were taking, Yossi was taking 2 or 3, which was so not like him. He was really a shy child. And he's dancing, and every once in a while he would disappear, and I figured he's at the back with his friends. And about midnight I came and I said, my husband was out of town actually. He was walking back the next morning, and I was there with my daughter. And I said to him, Yossi, it's time to go home. And his face was all red, and he was he looked a little bit excited. And he said to me, I'm not ready to go. I'm having happy juice. I'd never seen anybody drunk. My husband doesn't drink. I didn't really know what it was, but I said, how are you going to get home? So his friend, who looked like he had even more happy juice than Yossi, said, I'll bring him home. And I don't know how smart it was to leave one drunk in charge of the other, but I did. I left them there and I walked home. And we got home, it was about 1 a.m, and we were waiting for Yossi, he still wasn't home. I waited a little longer, then I got nervous and I told my daughter, and it's the holiday, we don't drive on the holiday. We got to go back and get Yossi. So we walked back to the synagogue and I find him, and it's not pretty because he really wasn't able to handle his liquor. He was really pretty far gone. And I kind of rouse him up and take him out. And he gets outside the synagogue and there's fresh air. By now it's really late, it's like early in the morning already. And I guess the fresh air gave him a new vibe, he was refreshed. And he starts, but still drunk. He's running up and down the street, flapping his hands like he's an airplane, and he's shouting, flight number, whatever, from LA to New York. And he's shouting the name of the girl he's dating. We don't do that in our Hasidic circles, just so you get the picture. Yeah. Yossi was with the hat and the yarmulke and the tucked in white shirt, and we're talking about his straight black hat and little mini rabbi. He really was a rabbi. He was ordained, all serious. And he's flapping his arms, and then he starts somersaulting. Now, we had invested in a whole dating clothing. He has a brand new suit and new shoes and a nice hat. And he's somersaulting on the filthy sidewalk, and I have to get him home. And I'm trying to get him home, and he's happy. And I got a little frustrated, and I said, Yossi, you're impossible. So he gets up and he says, I'm not impossible. I'm possible. I'm possible. And he liked the way that sounded. And the rest of the way home, he's dancing in front of me. I'm possible. We finally got him home the next morning. It's still the holiday. He has to go to synagogue in his Crocs and his old suit because everything is wrecked. He dates, he gets married, he gets engaged, and then he died. The funeral was exactly 6 weeks to the day of the wedding. On the last day of the Shiva, we sit Shiva for 7 days. People come, they speak. And I pushed myself through the Shiva by telling myself only one thing. When everybody goes home, I will just figure out, I don't know how, but I'll find a way. I'm not going to continue. I didn't know if I would just give up. I wasn't sure how, and it was pretty dark. But that's the only way I was able to soothe myself. Just wait till everybody leaves. The last day of the Shiva was a Friday, and I was sitting outside on the porch. It was just a few stragglers left. Everybody had gone. And I was really thinking pretty heavy, dark thoughts to the point that I actually scared myself. Yeah. So I knew that even I had a sense of my own health, that you can't do that. So I turned to the woman next to me. She's a professional singer. And I said, sing something. And she looked at me like I'm insane. I mean, we don't sing during Shiva. And I said, I need to hear a song. I need to stop thinking. So she asked the woman next to her what to sing. There are millions of songs in the world, billions of songs in the world. Of all the songs, here's what she sang me. She sang to me, it's possible. It's possible. Everything is possible. Just keep your mind upon your goal. Turn to God with all your soul. It's possible. And I saw Yossi dancing in the night. And I always say, he didn't say it's possible. He said, I'm possible. Because we have soul. I'm possible. I have soul. And so you're asking how soon? There were messages from the beginning. Yeah. And in spite of myself, as much as I wanted to give up, I didn't know how that would look, but I just saw black. I could not see, and I was sure of it. There wasn't even a question how I would continue to live without Yossi. He was so anchored to me, and I couldn't see how I would get past the rage that something else had happened. And then I would get reminders. This is just one. There were so many.
I know that that's the process, right? So denial, anger, eventually acceptance, and you have to move on. And I remember the story. My wife's an only child, and she was basically raised by her grandmother. And when her grandmother passed, we had gone to New York to the funeral, and then we were there a couple days. And my wife Yafis looked out the window, and she said, "My kids are here. We live in Miami, and if you hear me, then it would start snowing." And it literally started to snow. And I, again, everyone has their own personal journey on their spiritual side, but I do believe there is that soul, and we come in, and because how do you explain, when you hear past life regression, right? And the person, all of a sudden start speaking Chinese. He never lived in China, or certain things that are beyond nature. So I just implore people to do their own research and their own searching, because I think everyone's looking for meaning and purpose. And I know that it became important for you. I know you go around speaking and telling your story. What is that like for you? Just kind of going out there as a speaker?
It keeps me close to Yossi. That's really what it is. And it came by, I would say by accident, but there are no accidents. But a year after Yossi died, we call it the yard site. It's the anniversary of the death. Our community made a gathering for him. And they asked me to speak. And I hadn't been out in a year. I mean, that first year I was really pretty locked away. I was just too busy feeling sorry for myself. And, it was just a very, very, very black time. I would sit by the ocean and just look at the waves and think about how they stole his soul. I mean, I was pretty lost there. But by the anniversary of his death, I was aware enough of soul to know that this is an important journey for the soul. The soul moves up in stages at 30 days and then at a year. And I knew that I couldn't let Yossi down. I mean, if you love someone however they are. And Yossi was in a soul state. And I knew that honoring that day at a soul level was important. So I spoke for our community. And I spoke about what I had learned that year from a very honest place. I don't know that it was very inspirational, but it was truth. And somebody asked me to speak in their community because somebody was struggling. So I did that. And from there, somebody asked me to speak. So I never sat down and said, Yossi died, I'm going to go around and become a public speaker. It surprised me very much. If anyone would have asked me what I did that first year, I would have said I did nothing. But I journaled, and that journaling became a book. So it came in the most wondrous way, which is by itself. I became a public speaker just because people asked me, come and tell us. And my talking has evolved. And I always figured that's because the people need to hear whatever I'm up to at that stage, because I don't sound the way I did 10 years ago. So Yossi died in 2005. No, sorry, 2010. November 5th, 2010. Sorry. So it's 11 years now, but I don't sound now the way I did. But the people who hear me now need to hear the message that I'm giving now. And I do that. I travel a lot now. But it came from God just opened that door. I never intended it. And I realized how it keeps me close to Yossi and not in a horrifying way, because at the very beginning, and that's where the EMDR helped too, it was just so frightening for me to think about what that was like for him in the water. And, as a mom, I was worried, like, how did he suffer? I'm past that now. I don't focus on that. I focus on the essence of who he was. And the speaking really gives me the ability to use what happened in a way to bring hope, for me to reconnect to my own faith and to give people hope that you do get up, you do continue. It doesn't look the same, but it's not all pain and horror and bad.
And I know you mentioned you have a book coming out in August.
Yeah.
Even if I'm not, is that from your journal? Is that kind of where you are now? Life lessons. Tell us a little bit about the book.
So even if I'm not was something that Yossi said. Yossi had a lot of quirky expressions. He was such a bright and interesting child. It started, he was about 6 or 7 years old, and I was rushing around the kitchen and the morning, getting everybody out the door. And I kind of just called over my shoulder and I said, Yossi, there's bagels on the counter if you're hungry. And he said to me, even if I'm not. And I said, what? And he said, because he always used to talk this way, he said, well, you said there's bagels on the counter if I'm hungry. The bagels are on the counter even if I'm not hungry. And that became like a family line, because people say it a lot. I used to go shopping and the salesperson says, hi, my name is Anna if you need anything. And I think, no, your name is not Anna if I need anything. Your name is Anna anyway. So even if I'm not means it's there anyway. And I remember there was one Shabbos. Shabbos was particularly hard because Yossi died right before Shabbat. And I light candles for each of my children. So I used to light 10 candles, 4 for my babies and 4 for my living children. And then I would light 2 oil candles because it's a merit for sons who will bring the light and the wisdom Torah into this world. And Yossi died right before Shabbat. So I had to light the candles right when I got home. And it was the only time in my life where really doing that, lighting the candles, it felt almost impossible. I really but I did it because we do what we have to do. And every week Shabbat was a challenge for us because he wasn't buried till Sunday. So it was a very, very weird and just I couldn't shock. The shock was so severe. So Shabbat for many, many, many months was challenging. And then there was one Shabbat where I remember thinking, everything that we learn about souls, for souls, Shabbat is a party. Even souls that have to atone in the next world, on Shabbat, they get to be with the angels. Shabbat is a nice time for souls. And I thought all this, and that gave me comfort. And that was the first little door that opened that I realized, even if I'm not, meaning it's there anyway, the wisdom, the comfort, the answers that I'm looking for, which is, where is my son now? Like, what reality is he in? How can I understand how he was so close to me and now he's so far, but his essence is still here? It's all there. There are books you can open. There are people you can speak to. There's wisdom you can access that helps you understand that existence is more than what we see right in front of us. It's all there. It's all ready, even if I'm not.
That's really special. I'm trying not to put myself in that position, but I do know that it is important for the listeners. What advice, in sum, would you say someone's in that really kind of dark space? What would you say would be the best tool to kind of come to a better place?
Awareness of, within everything that happens, awareness of the potential for what this can bring out in you. Because we can't change whatever it is. Like when people have, they're dealing with someone, let's say, who has mental illness, or they're dealing with a bad relationship, or they're lonely, or they had a difficult childhood, or all the things that we can't change. So a lot of times we function because we have to, and that's important, that's good. But for me, that will only take me so far, because then there's resentment or bitterness, or sometimes we just can't. But what really was able to lift me from that, and it's not like I walk around on this big high of I'm possible, and also I miss my son every day. I still ache for the sadness that we went through in those 10 years when the babies, having the babies and when they were sick. It's constant. People ask me how many children I have, and I kind of want to step on their toes. So it's not so simple. It's not like we walk around in this spiritual bliss, but I do function with a very real awareness that this world is a journey, and everything that happens to us is the material that we use. And we create something in this world. We create goodness. We turn into our own souls, and we find potential. Even when we're feeling bitter, we can actually have empathy from that, and we can learn from that to be sensitive to other people. In every hardship, there is potential for some growth. It doesn't mean that it's pain-free or easy, but if it's something that can be changed, and I remember with Yossi driving home from the hospital, realizing that too. With my babies, there was a lot of work we could do. So that was the kind of test where I've learned to ask myself, what is this situation asking of me? Do I need to do medical research? Do I need to speak to doctors or experts? Sometimes we get tested in a way where we have to do something, but sometimes we get tested in a way that we just have to endure. And that was what hit me on the way home from the hospital. There's nothing I can do. I just have to be. I have to survive this. I won't, and I don't want to, but I have to. Besides having to take care of my family. And I sensed that. And the only way to do that was to lean in to my awareness that everything in this world is work. But it doesn't all have to be horrible. We can become kinder. We can become more sensitive. We can use our time better. Tragedy forces us sometimes to do that.
Yes. It's, I was Les Brown that said that that pain is everywhere. It's unavoidable. Unavoidable suffering, unavoidable pain. The question is our choice, what we do, each person, our reaction, day by day sustainable, what we do, what do we learn, what's our mission here in this world. And I really appreciate the book and public speaking, going and having the courage to do that. And then, showing the people that things are, again, possible. How can people learn more about you and your story?
DevorieKreiman.com. DEVORIE. My last name is KREIMAN. So just my name, DevorieKreiman.com. Thank you for that. The book is coming out through Israel Bookshop. I'm excited by it. But I have a bunch of articles on my website.
Yes.
And it's just a gift for me every time that I feel like I bring Yossi with me. That this is not just a life that passed through this world and is mourned by those who knew him and were close to him. This is this energy that I can use from it. It's a gift that Yossi just left with us to talk about real things.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Really, it means a lot. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Common Denominator podcast. Join us next week for another inspiring, impactful, and empowering conversation. To learn more about Moshe, head to MoshePopak.com. And if you enjoyed this episode, feel free to share it, and we'd be grateful if you could rate, review, and subscribe to the show. Have a great day, and we'll talk to you again soon.